Hi, everyone. I'm Tim Basinger, Senior TV Reporter at TheWrap. Welcome to TheGrill's streaming platforms, What's Next for Content Distribution in a Fragmented World, presented by Pantaya. Before we jump into today's discussion, let's meet our panelists. First up, we have Danny Fisher, who is the co-founder and CEO of FilmRise, the largest third-party provider of content to streaming platforms. With over 40,000 hours of content in his library, FilmRise clients include Amazon Prime, Peacock, IMDb TV, and Roku. Speaking of Roku, we have Jennifer Vox, who oversees content strategy, acquisition, programming, and scheduling for the Roku channel, where she works to license content across the US, Canada, and the UK. Our next panelist is Paul Pressberger, who is the CEO of Pantaya Films and Pantaya, a premier destination for Spanish language movies and series. For over 25 years, Paul has delivered films and television programming to niche audiences across Europe, Asia, Latin America, and the US Hispanic market. Finally, but certainly not last, we have Pato Spagnoletto, who is the Global Chief Marketing Officer for Discovery's direct-to-consumer business, where he is responsible for subscriber acquisition, retention and growth, media and analytics, brand awareness, marketing, creative development, and strategy, and consumer insights. I want to thank everybody for being here. It's really great to have you guys.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
So we'll start off hopefully with an easy one for all of you. I'm kind of interested in this idea of that there's sort of this David versus Goliath in streaming, because on one end you have these places like Netflix, Amazon, Disney, Apple, and then the other end you have these like really hyper targeted services by either genre like Discovery Plus or demographic like Pantaya. So how do some of the, I don't want to say smaller services, but someone like a Pantaya or even a Discovery Plus who's very genre specific, how do you guys compete with or alongside or against some of the bigger general entertainment streaming services?
So we obviously aspire to be not just a smaller service, but a service that is for the entire universe. And based on our latest numbers, around 18 million subscribers as of our last earnings, we're well on our way there, especially given since we launched earlier this year. But to get to your question, we are not trying to be the next Netflix or Disney Plus. Because of the content that we have, we feel like we have a place in consumers' minds and honestly in their time, for a place in time for content that is more unscripted and just of a different genre. That hypothesis is proving true when we look at not just the growth rate of the subscribers, but when we look at the engagement rates. So the number of hours that they're spending on the service, it's pretty clear that we're meeting a need as measured by those hours per week or per month, which are really meaningful. So to broaden the question, or the answer, I should say, look, I think the universe is big enough that it's easy for services to say, I want it all. But I think across the board, more and more services come on. It's really important to figure out who we are and who we're not. And I think thankfully, at least for Discovery, it was pretty easy to do given like our history and the content that we have and we brought to the service.
I'd like to echo that. I think it's a big part of doing what we do for our audience better than those big guys. They try to be everything to everybody, and there's a place for that. I don't look at them as competitors. I look at them as path leaders, so to speak. When we thought about launching Pantaya, we had an output deal at Pantaleon Films with Netflix, and when that deal was over and Netflix wanted to then cut our rate card significantly, we looked at ourselves and said, there's a hole in the market for a premium Spanish language service. There have been Telemundo and Univision broadcast networks, but there've never been a premium like an HBO for Latinos. And so we saw an opportunity, but could we get over the hump with this audience who was acculturating at a quick speed and speaking Spanish, and many of them were unbanked or and sending money to Latin America through Western Union and these types of things. Could they pay for a service was a question, and technologically were they savvy enough? Well, we know that Latinos over-index in broadband and in their mobile phones and all of these platforms. We've seen those numbers. We were in a theater testing one of our movies, and we did a focus group afterwards. And this was what we consider ground zero for us, which is Southgate, California. for the Hispanic audience. And we asked, how many of you have Netflix? And every hand in the auditorium went up. And it was like, aha moment in a sense. It wasn't like Netflix is already there. It was more like they're streaming. They know how to do it. They know how to pay for it. We have an opportunity. And what we've done, different than other people. We've spent 10 years because of Pantaleon Films having to get Latinos to get off the couch, go to the movie theater and buy tickets, spending money for content, as opposed to what Univision Telemundo does, serving them free content. And so my marketing group, which at Pantaleon became my marketing group at Pantaya, and we treat each series as so special, as if it's a theatrical release. We tour the cast pre-pandemic. We advertise on TV and radio, and we try to be bigger for our audience than the other guys. The other guys, things get lost on the shelf. They're not going to market every program that goes on, especially they're not going to market the Spanish language programming in a big way. And so we think we're able to be more targeted, more strategic, and we look at them as partners. My two biggest shows, I partnered with Amazon in Latin America, and so we look at them for what they're trying to do in Latin America as a partner for us to bring our programming to our audience in the U.S. So we think we just do things a little bit more focused and targeted than they do. And I'm sure, for Discovery on a genre basis, nobody's going to do that kind of content better than them. And nobody's going to cancel Netflix to buy Pantaya. But if we have shows they want to watch, they'll buy Pantaya as well.
Yeah, I'd like to just sum up with Pato and Paul. I certainly agree with with everything you're saying, Paul and Pato. And I don't really look at the universe as, well, there's Netflix and there's HBO Max and there's Pantaya and there's Discovery Plus. The universe is so big, and I think for so long, we've had the entertainment industry has really been one where major studios have dictated what consumers will see. Major studios will, deliver their blockbusters and kind of market it, and the old theatrical model. And I think the current streaming market is such that it's democratized the viewing, and this has now become worldwide. And there are audiences who want to see Spanish language content. There are audiences who want to see, great documentary content. We actually have a fantastic deal with Discovery Plus, as you know, Pato. And of course, we have an amazing deal with Jennifer Vox at the Roku channel. And what we look to do is to surface content that viewers want to see. But it's often specific viewers. It could be the Black demographic, it could be the Hispanic demographic, and of course it's worldwide. And I think that worldwide, anyone who's not focusing on the rest of the world is going to find themselves 5 years behind the time in 5 years. Because I think in 3 to 5 years, the world streaming landscape is going to look so different than it does now. And I kind of see the next couple of years I describe it as really, for myself, as an explosion of streaming, certainly in the ad-supported, but also in the SVOD. So it's not about competing with Netflix or trying to be the next HBO. It's about really surfacing content and developing viewerships along their interest lines. And there will always be, and it's amazing to me that there's been so many underserved viewers for so many decades, and I think now with sort of this democratized streaming landscape, platforms like Discovery Plus and Pantaya and the Roku channel can actually speak to those markets.
I might add, I agree. Global is super important. One of the things in terms of competing with the big guys that we're able to do is we're really nimble. I mean, I typically, if I love a pitch or we love a show, my programming guys, we'll finance 100% of it. But we also know that that content has to work elsewhere to really finance it properly. So we'll take the risk on the front end and we'll bring in Amazon, or we're doing a lot of stuff with Spain right now where we're co-producing with Spain and stuff that we're bringing to them. So we're thinking globally because we know there's a significant source of revenue. But what being in the US and focused on the US allows us to do versus some of our competitors, because they're all big in Spanish language. You know, Latin America is a jungle right now in terms of streaming competition and big shows. But we're also able to focus on the specific demographics within the Latino audience. So it is not monolithic. We learned that at Pantaleon. The Dominican Americans are not going to watch what the Mexican Americans watch, and the Puerto Ricans are completely different. And there are things that are going to work everywhere across Latin America, in the whole Spanish-speaking world. And then if it's a great show, as we've seen, like Casa de Papel or Casa de las Flores, these shows will work everywhere. But we're also able to micro-target and have content for the Dominican audience. Netflix never going to do that for the Puerto Rican audience in the U.S., both the mainland and on the island. So I think being able to zero in on those things that we're able to cater to that in a more specific way also gives us an advantage as we're trying to get subscribers here in the US.
This discussion kind of leads to another point I want to ask about, because it's kind of, in my opinion, one of the more fascinating and kind of unexpected things about the current streaming era is this idea that the foreign language barrier has kind of been broken down, and that you're seeing a lot of content viewed by like non-native speakers from that language. I mean, some of Netflix's most popular shows are Money Heist, Lupin, shows that you really wouldn't think would play in America or somewhere else. People are more willing to watch something either that's dubbed or in subtitles. So, how is that affecting, what you guys are doing, especially Paul? Like, how is that affecting, maybe where your content is getting distributed, because it potentially has a bigger audience than maybe 5 or 10 years ago it wouldn't have?
I think for us, I think honestly, I mean, Netflix was a game changer in this area. And I think Narcos, for me, right, and for my audience, Narcos was like the first one. That show, which was pitched as this English language show, and you had these, the DEA agents all spoke English. And then, by season 2 and season 3, and then Narcos, it's a Spanish language show.
Mm-hmm.
And when you really realize it, so was season 1, they just had a narrator speaking in English, the DEA agent. You put that in Spanish, it was 90% in Spanish. And I think the most important thing that people are looking for is things to be organic, right? So, we'll watch something, especially my audience who are bilingual or even English dominant. They just want it to feel like how they live their lives and feel organic. And we've done that on the movie side. And we do that at Pantaya too. And one of the things that was really interesting, and we're seeing it as we're growing, and we looked at, everybody asks us, what's the size of potential size of your market? And there are 67 million Latinos in the US, but a lot of them are very acculturated, don't speak Spanish at all, right? Their grandparents did, and their grandparents are still watching Spanish language programming. And, people would say, well, that's my grandparents. That's why, they had it out on the house when they were growing up. But one of the issues was with that, and that's where you look at Univision and Telemundo and what they've done, is that, the telenovela is great storytelling, but it's not premium, and so for young people growing up in a culture like Hollywood or in the US where they're seeing amazing premium programming and premium storytelling, that Spanish language world wasn't bringing that to them. And what Netflix has done, and some of the other guys, and in Spain and some of these shows moving here, it's all of a sudden we have premium Spanish language programming. And we're seeing a whole, we're at 1 million subscribers now, and a lot of young people who are bilingual or even English dominant are coming onto Pantaya to watch our series. because one, it speaks to their culture, so they're enjoying it from that, and they, you know, again, it's premium, so they can associate with it, and there's this notion of retro acculturating, where they want to go back and touch where they came from and find out more about what. I mean, I'm watching the Israeli shows. I can't get enough of that Israeli content. The storytelling is so great, the action, the drama, it's just fantastic.
Cannot get enough of Sissel, right?
Stissel was, I think, one of the best family dramas ever. I mean, bar none. I mean, it was just amazing. And I feel like there's never, obviously there's never been a better time to be in the content creation space here. Yeah, language is becoming less and less a barrier.
Yeah, I'll say, look, from the discovery perspective and kind of what I've seen is I almost think of it as there's 3 tiers of content. There is content that is created truly in language A, usually English, that can travel abroad. And so those are your big hits that exist, but in reality, they're the vast minority of what actual travels well between countries or regions. Then there's franchises, like in the case of Discovery or Discovery Plus, franchises like Naked and Afraid or 90 Day Fiance, who have just a core truth that resonate really well, but then are localized to any given market. And that localization really brings that extra mile that makes those franchises really resonate within those markets. Because if we brought the US version into Brazil or the UK version into Italy, it just wouldn't resonate as much, right? There's something about the culture that has to be really specific within the audience and what they're seeing. The third one, and honestly it's the most common, is local content for local audiences or local countries, right? We had a great success in India with a title called The Secrets of Sonali. That title did phenomenally well for us. That title will not travel to any other country, but it served its purpose for India. And I can give you like another, plenty of examples, and I'm sure we all can. But if you think about like almost in a pyramid, universal content, franchises that are localized, and then local content in terms of just the way that it applies, which means, scalability and portability. Everybody likes to say, hey, I'm going to build one piece of content and the whole world can see it. The whole world can see it. Doesn't mean they will see it because it's just not relevant for them. So I think kind of attuning it to a country or to a culture, there's no substitute for that. There really isn't. Even if you can stream the same service in 200 countries, doesn't mean that you're going to watch the same content in 200 countries.
No, that's true. And I think too, if you look at how a user watches and you have your on demand, but what we're seeing a lot of success with are our foreign language fast channels. So we have quite a few Spanish language fast channels that we work with partners on bringing their content into the US. And we're seeing really good engagement with that. So people are used to subtitles now. I think back in the day when I was in cable television, we used to say no to British accents. So definitely the culture has changed, and I think streaming has accelerated that. People are much more comfortable with that kind of storytelling.
I want to ask you about how the Quibi content is playing on the Roku channel, because obviously that came, I forget, a few months ago that started premiering, and obviously it's done much better on Roku than I think it did on Quibi. Some of those shows, found their second life, got second seasons, and some, they hadn't really premiered before yet. But what maybe is the most surprising aspect that you guys have noticed on Roku as to how people are watching, Roku original content, which is kind of still a fairly new thing that you guys are doing?
No, that's right. And look, we're absolutely thrilled with the performance of the content that we've seen to date on the platform. We launched a batch in May and then another batch just recently. And what we're seeing is very deep engagement. People are coming in, they're watching the content, and then they're going on to watch other more traditional shows that we've had on the service for quite some time. And so what we're seeing is the tide rising all boats in that regard, and we're super thrilled. And then stuff that you would expect to do well, like Die Hard. I mean, who doesn't love Kevin Hart? Did so well, we're going to renew it for a season 2. And so we're constantly looking at the data to see what's resonating with our audience and what we're going to invest in for season 2s. And then in general, just what's working and how do we want to build out the strategy. And we've hired 2 amazing leads who were from Quibi to lead our script charge into scripted and unscripted. And so they're going to be looking at this quite closely to determine what our strategy is going forward.
And, moving back over to this whole idea of distribution, kind of to my earlier points about, especially with like a lot of foreign language content, how it's traveling well beyond its borders now. And, it does seem like streaming has kind of changed a lot of what was maybe had been a localized, market in kind of whatever country, to this idea that streaming is very much a global thing. It's a lot of these, streaming services do look at stuff on a global scale. But in terms of distribution strategy, is it possible to kind of have this sort of one size fits all global distribution strategy, or like, do you still need to kind of have it localized for each region?
If I can take a crack at that, I don't think it's a one size fits all strategy. I think you have to look at, every region. I think Pato mentioned that, we've been buying shows that are local hits in Germany, for example, and they're local hits in Germany and they're known by the German audience. They're not going to go outside of Germany. On the other hand, we take other shows like I think we're releasing Anger Management dubbed in German, and so that is working. So both the local German hits and the American dubbed, the American hits that are dubbed, are working. And again, it's not across the board, but you really have to, I think, look at region by region. But I also think you have to look at language by language, and within the U.S., there's more than one language. We're realizing. I mean, with 60 million or whatever, Spanish speaking. There are quite a number of Indian speaking. And another language speaking. And when you get into the Nordics, I don't know, there's like 83 languages there. Again, that's a difficult one to get used to because there's so many languages. But you really have to, at this point, at FilmRise, we have a dual model. We have, as you mentioned at the outset, the largest provider to third-party, platforms, like the Roku channel, Pluto, Tubi, and those. But we also have our own AVOD service, the FilmRise streaming service, which we don't compare or compete with the Roku channel or Pluto TV. We're nowhere near that size. But for that sort of second tier, we're the largest ad-supported service in the outside the big 4 or 5. With the number one service. And so we sort of have a cake and eat it too situation where we're B2B and B2C, where we service the third party platforms, which we don't see as competitive, at all. And we have our own service, which provides content that we have. We have an assurance that 100% of our content will find, a great home because we have our own service. But also we use our own service as a testing ground for new content that we're placing. And sometimes before we place it, and before we decide on a method of placing it and a strategy for placing, our having the sort of luxury of having our own service and having millions of followers, subscribers of our own. Again, these are ad supported, so they're not actual paid subscribers, but it's still in the about 5 million range. Nothing like you mentioned Discovery Plus is small, and I'm thinking, yeah, that's not small. 18 million or whatever. We're at 5 million. We consider ourselves big because as an independent. But that 5 million users becomes a great testing ground for we feel is going to work on the Roku channel and other places. But it definitely, it's all about now. For me, we're investing, very heavily in content that we're buying. We're buying multiple language. It used to be like we never even thought about. Well, here's content. Now our contracts are all language rights, and wherever we can, we're licensing content for worldwide rights and multiple language rights. I think we have, like we bought Highway to Heaven, where we own, which we own exclusively. In Highway to Heaven, I think we have in every single language. We already have it dubbed into 9 different languages and releasing it all over the world. And that's the only strategy. The only strategy right now is worldwide. But you have to be patient because what we're seeing, we're releasing in Italy, we're releasing in Spain and France, and honestly, the numbers are small. But we remember what it was like in the UK when the numbers were really small, and but the growth rate is just incredibly high. Germany, the numbers were pretty small. The growth rate is really high. Numbers we're seeing in Italy, France, Spain, Latin America, are modest, but we look at month over month growth. Jen Fox, I remember when we first talked about the Roku channel, and I remember, the first month's, revenue was, I don't know, $1.13, and I was thinking, okay, whatever. I don't look at that. I look at, well, what's the next month, and then what's the growth rate, and then obviously the Roku channel has just grown so tremendously, in no small part to your efforts, I will say.
Like, just to add to that, because it's such a fascinating time for this industry, and industry in the broadest of definitions. I mean, if you think about it, in any given region, there is still a shift between free to air and or cable and or some other type of service that is in the traditional distribution. Layer onto that streaming, and within streaming, you have SVOD, AVOD, you have ad-supported SVOD, you have all these different business models and distributions. And then if you look at now what's happened during the pandemic, where companies were forced to kind of rethink their distribution windowing, even with theatrical, right? Like now, all of a sudden, a piece of content that was clearly designed to go into a theatrical distribution first is showing up in streaming. My point in all this is that, look, I don't think any one of us can guess where it will land. And to think that it is only streaming, I think honestly is a little premature and a little bit of arrogant, to be honest with you, because I think there is a lot of content that has better homes maybe in theatrical or linear or vice versa. So then the next question is, how can it travel? And I don't mean just regionally, I mean through the distribution platforms, right? If Disney Plus has done a phenomenal job at having content that starts in theatrical, moves to Disney Plus with a pass, then Disney Plus with your own subscription, and then eventually I'm sure it'll make it into linear. Like, these are all models that I think we're all going to have to play with, because at the end of the day, like, we all are so focused on subscriber numbers, but that's half the equation. The other half is ARPU. Like subscribers at zero revenue don't pay bills, right? Subscribers with some type of revenue, whether it's ad supported or subscription, pay bills, and that equation has to right size itself. And I think we're starting to see that. For Discovery, not Discovery Plus, but Discovery, the benefit that the company has is that it does own most of the content. So we can kind of experiment and kind of see what goes where to optimize for yield as well as subscribers. But I think that's what everybody will have to do at some point in time, because otherwise, if you're over-indexing on any one of those channels, you're just missing the bigger picture of how consumers want to see and just literally what their options are.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, again, having a feature film side of our company, theatrical side of our company, and is interesting. And the pandemic has really made it interesting. We released our first movie in theaters post-pandemic, I guess about 3 weeks ago. And I remember on Sunday, there was a great article in Deadline about it. One of the first specialty films that did over $1,000 a screen, and it was like hugely disappointing for us. So it was a sequel to an big animated movie for us. And the first one, when we released it, we did almost $10 million box office in the US. And on this one, we're going to get close to $1 million, so 1/10. And the call came in to me on Saturday or Sunday when the numbers came out. How much money are we going to lose? And, I thought about it for a second. I said, I think you're thinking about it the wrong way, because every dollar that I invested in P&A and the fact that people didn't get out of their seats and go to the movies to see it, when it hits the platform over the holidays, when we put it on the platform in November, that's when we're going to see. If we didn't own that platform, we would be dead, because the platform pays a rate card. So the platform's going to get it much cheaper than that $10 million movie, but I bet when it hits platform, it's going to perform better than the $10 million movie, because so many people saw it in the theaters, and here they're waiting to see it. And so it's just an interesting time. I've got 2 pictures in the can that we made that we were going to pre-pandemic and they're in the can and I can't figure it out. So fortunately we have our own streaming service. So it is a bit like, what Danny was saying about, if we can't find the right place, we have our own place to put it. Well, yeah, if they don't buy tickets in the theater, at least we know we're going to monetize it in our own platform. But you have to think about content distribution in a lot of different ways right now.
Paul, I'm wondering, do you take your content and release it outside of theaters and outside of your platform? Do you go to other platforms?
So the answer to that is it depends, right? Hemisphere Media Group, which bought Lionsgate out of our service at the end of March. Hemisphere has cable channels, the Cine Latino cable channels, Pasiones, a Dominican channel. They also own Wapa TV, which is the biggest broadcaster in Puerto Rico. So a lot of our content is windowing downstream to their channels. We've also sold stuff to Tubi, Pluto. Had to deal with Univision, with Prende on something. Typically, when I'm going downstream like that, I'll make sure that I have advertising for Pantaya back to Pantaya, right? I need to make sure that it becomes a barker, and I think there's a lot of value in that. It could be with Roku as well. So, for example, I know my wife was on Amazon Prime and she was watching a series. I can't remember what series it was, and she loved it and got through season 1 and then went to season 2. And oh, lo and behold, season 2, you got to subscribe to the Sundance Channel, And I think that kind of thing is great, where you can give somebody a taste of your programming and then lead them back to subscribe. So, for example, we have a series with Ana de la Reguera, her signature series, that we did season 1, and Amazon's our co-producer in Latin America. It's actually Viacom Studios producing it for Amazon and us. And we're talking with Amazon about putting season 1 in Prime, right? And then season 2 and then season 3 will be on Pantaya, and then they can go into Prime channels and subscribe right away. So I think there are certain things that we're just going to want to keep. Like, I always say, I was in a meeting the other day because we have all these other channels, and I said, look how long it took HBO to put Sopranos and Sex and the City on the Turner channels, right? It was a long time, and if people are going to pay you every month, they want to know if they think they can get it a year later for free. I think your value proposition changes. So I think there's certain content certainly that we're going to go. The feature films for sure will go downstream. Some of our signature series may stay exclusive to us.
I'm good. If I can ask a question of my co-panelist, Tim, I don't want to play moderator here, but I'm just wondering what everybody thinks. There are, if you're going back 2 years and then looking at, the climate today, there is like, there wasn't a Disney Plus, there wasn't a Discovery Plus, there wasn't an HBO Max, there was, does everybody feel that the marketplace and the consumers can support as many, platforms as we currently have and are, continuing to grow, or do people feel like they're going to be just, channels just, falling out because they can't, make it? Jen Vox, do you have a thought?
Well, I guess if you look at the kind of legacy model for cable, you were paying a monthly fee and you had access to over 200 channels. The great thing about what we have right now is choice for consumers. And so if you're a Roku platform or a Fire platform, you can present everything that the consumer wants to watch. I mean, we have universal search that will show a show on every single platform ranked in order of how much it costs. And so I'm, again, a Pollyanna for streaming. I think the more choice, the better for the consumers, and they'll find your content as long as it's discoverable, as long as it's easy to use the platform in order to subscribe, and that you continue to have good content and lots of choice to keep people engaged.
I would say one of the challenges by all of these services coming up, so, even just like a year and a half ago, and It really started kind of towards the end of last year, but like at the beginning of the pandemic, oh my God, it's not a secret. I mean, we're getting, like everybody else, we're getting most of our subscriptions through digital ads on Facebook and through Google. That's where we get most of it. And when pandemic started, all these traditional people stopped advertising. Everybody was worried, and the CPMs in digital were really cheap. Then you get towards the end of last year when all of a sudden Disney launches and these other guys are all launching, and all of a sudden CPMs went up like 2.5 times. And so our customer acquisition cost became much more stressed, right? Just wasn't that people weren't clicking on our stuff or buying stuff. It just, the inventory was so much more expensive. And so it's that competition that I worry about. I don't worry about it. I kind of would echo what Jennifer said, is like, if you have the right content people want to watch, they're going to find it, And so, but I do think, if you've got Showtime stars, HBO, now, HBO Max and Showtime and Paramount Plus, I mean, those two got to come together. I know they're doing a bundle, of course. But so there will be more. Look at all the consolidation that's going on. There will be for some of those that can't support all of those. But I don't think we're at a point of, too many yet.
I'll just round it out. Before Discovery, I was heading up marketing at Hulu and was there for 4 years. So I was kind of during the transition of like the fewer players to the many players, and kind of observing there in complement to what I've had the learning experience here at Discovery Plus, is that there is a kind of a big short head and a long tail. There's going to be probably 3 or 4, I don't know what the number is, services that people will keep just out of habit and routine. And then many more services where people will come in and out of based on whatever piece of content is that they're interested in. But the notion of keeping a subscriber on for years on end is a lot harder for services that are more that torso and tail than it is for those head services. So look, I think you can fight that battle in one of two ways. You can either try and get yourself into one of those top 3 services, which is obviously hard at many levels, but then has the rewards behind it. Or you can think about how you get ubiquitous distribution by, yes, providing your service directly to consumers. And do you consider other platforms like Roku channels or, Prime Video channels and, many of these other services where they help curate that content into an experience that consumers are more likely to discover than each one individually. I think this is the second part of the unknown in the world that we live in, is on the distribution side. Many services really will tout that direct to consumer relationship is really critical, but I don't think that every service can afford to have only that. If they're looking truly for broad distribution, many services will have to make a choice on a distribution versus kind of margins and having only one way to reach them. So
I'd like to just address something that, I think, certainly we're doing at FilmRise, and, the Roku channel is in all worlds, but probably, more so in the ad-supported world. And I just want to address the reality what we're seeing of personal economics. We talk about economics, for us, for the providers, the platforms. But, when I look at the personal economics, I'm in daily touch, since I have my own streaming service, I'm in daily touch with, my own audience. And like my own audience, and out of the 5 million, subscribers that I have for my own, AVOD platform, it's, I said, hey, what else have you got? I mean, I'm amazed. So many of people in my audience, demographics are, the economic demographics are, below 75,000, below 50,000. These are people that don't have, they're not cord cutters, they're cord nevers. They never had cable, they never had Netflix, they can't afford, or they don't want to afford. I think there's a number of different economic considerations. One is kind of like, well, I'll take, like, as you said, Pato, I'll have like my Netflix, and I'll have my Amazon Prime, and maybe I'll do my Disney Plus, and then everything else is sort of like I'll go in and out of. But there is, you have to recognize in the U.S., but boy, as you get around the world, it's even going to be more so. It's going to take some time, for the whole advertising, sales to develop. But I mean, there are a lot of people in the United States that cannot afford even a single Netflix, subscription. And this is where, channels like the Roku channel, where you can see an unbelievable amount, of content, or, Pluto TV, Tubi, IMDb TV, and you don't have to subscribe. You don't have to log in. You don't have to give your email address. For a lot of people who are also distrustful of giving out their email addresses and at a time when there's legitimate, privacy issues and piracy and all this kind of stuff and scams. And so you don't have to log in, you don't have to do anything, and you can watch, some of the, top television shows and movies, ever produced. And so I really think that, look, I mean, maybe it's self-serving. Probably 80% of my business is ad supported versus 20% in SVOD. But I would just say the thing about ad supported is that it's economically viable for so many people in the United States. And when you look outside the United States, it's even more viable, when you get out to it. And so I believe it's just an explosive marketplace that it's actually, even with the massive growth of, the Roku channel and, Pluto TV, recently hit like $1 billion in revenue. And boy, I remember it was just a couple of years ago that I was having breakfast with the founders, and they were like, wow, one day we'll reach, 100 million. They were a long way away from it. And so, but even with all that growth, and even with all that, Viacom buying, Pluto, and Fox buying Tubi, even with all that sort of attention, I kind of feel that the ad-supported streamers do not get the kind of attention because they're still not as shiny objects as Disney Plus and and HBO Max. But I think what ad-supported has for it is the personal economics, which is, and some of us in our bubble, sorry guys, but including myself, I mean, I hate to say it, I've never watched my own channel because I don't want to watch commercials, but I can afford, multiple subscriptions. I have Netflix and Hulu and, and Disney Plus and all, and all those others, and Acorn and BritBox and on, but, honestly, I'm an entrepreneur, I can afford that. But many, many Americans, and how many billions of people around the world cannot afford, a single subscription. And that's where I think ad-supported is just, is actually as much attention as it's gotten. It's an underrated phenomenon. And Jen, I'm actually wondering what you think about that.
Pretty much what you said.
Danny, in some ways, you just described ad-supported or the free ad-supported streaming services is sort of like the new version of the people, maybe 30 or 40 years ago who didn't buy cable, who owned a broadcast TV antenna and only got like those 4 or 5 channels. But they did it because they didn't want to pay for cable.
Free is a very strong value proposition.
Yeah, absolutely. And then ad support is divided into, VOD and FAST. And what's interesting about FAST is actually not back to the future, it's back to the past. I mean, when I think about FAST channels, I think about the 1950s Milton Berle, is ready for a commercial break. So they wheel out the refrigerator and show the refrigerator, then they wheel it back out. I mean, you're really going way back to a time when you didn't have to log in. There was no emails. There was no, privacy concerns. There was no money exchange. You basically had your television set. You had your rabbit ears, and you can watch these TV shows. And the FAST channel, the linear digital experience is essentially, mirroring that kind of passive experience, of the past. And that, I could certainly see with the Roku channel, how, essentially started out as a VOD service. And it's become, the fast side of it has actually, the linear side of it has just grown, tremendously. and apparently there's an audience appetite, for that, passive experience, which on at one level I didn't understand, because I just didn't understand how. I just didn't get it. Like, you go into, you're watching a TV show and you're watching, midway through it, or a movie you're watching midway through it, and I don't know, it was my wife came home from work, back before the pandemic, and sitting in front of the couch, and I said, "What are you watching?" And she said, "I don't know." And when she said that, I realized, oh, that's what passive, I'm burnt out. I don't have time to choose what I want to watch. I don't know what I want to watch. I'm just going to turn on a channel I like, a channel I never heard of, and just whatever's there, let me see what, kind of floats my boat.
But Danny, to your point, I think you need a strong brand, and you also need the value proposition in the title of the channel. I think we have over 200 channels now in our fast lineup, which is very exciting. But you need a Discovery and a Pantaya to have something that has meaning. And so, just be curious to see how you guys are, if you're thinking of planning of moving into the fast space or whatnot. I know you had some channels up on Pluto, for example.
Yeah, look, on the Discovery side, that's not in our plans for now, at least. I think we are focused exclusively on growing Discovery Plus as an ad-supported and obviously an ad-free option. To your point of the brand, I think that is such an important piece for any and all these services, in that, look, first and foremost, content, right? If you don't have the right content, it doesn't matter. To a lesser extent, I think the platform, i.e. the tech piece, that becomes to me almost like, if you don't have it, it's a loss. But if you have it, you're on par with everyone else. I think consumers are starting to expect a platform where you can quickly discover, get to, and start consuming. But the last part, which we don't talk as much about, is the brand, right? So that affinity, that emotional connection with a service, so that when you are Danny's wife and you walk in at 6 o'clock late in the day, you're like, I don't care. Let me just, there is a micro moment where you're making a decision based on your brand affinity, right? And so that's where, at least us from a marketer's perspective, think it's so important to build that emotional connection at the platform level that is then supported at the content level, for sure, and vice versa. But we're not going to be in a business where everything is driven 100% at the show level, because then people will become one of the platforms where people go in and out of based on whatever it is that we have. And we don't want that. We want to be one of those top, like, again, the hypothesis of the top 3 or 4, whatever it is. But brand, without the brand, you're dead on arrival.
I think that's right. I think great content is great content, and people will find it, but people will stay if they have an association with the brand and know what to expect from it. And it's more great content down the road. And we see, look, churn, it's a bitch, right? I always feel like it's like rolling a big concrete ball up a hill. You're getting subscribers and you're losing ground at the same time, and you just hope you're going uphill instead of it rolling back on you. And but the beautiful thing about it is that the more you build your brand and the better content you start bringing to that brand, the longer those people stay with you. And the people that have been there, people are going to leave. They came in for a show, they watch it, they leave. They leave in the first 2-3 months. And if you got them more than 2 or 3 months, obviously we've been going almost 4 years now, and we have people who've been on for 4 years, and those are super valuable consumers. The longer they're there, the more likely they are to stay. For those people, I would argue we are that head. We're one of the 3 or 4 things that they must have. And that's what you want to do, is from our perspective, try to build that. There's a long tail in terms of different types of content, but I think Discovery has both, right? Discovery has the head, but you've got a lot of long tail content as well on there, and so what you want to do, at least for the audience you're trying to hit, become a must-have. That for subscription, I think the ad supported is it's an interesting model, and we're starting to advertise there. We're starting to try to see, because again, if Facebook and Google is the only place where we can find subscribers, it's a slog and it's getting more and more expensive. We need to find other pockets of our consumers. We're looking at grassroots in the community, grocery stores, takeovers of grocery stores with panels and flags in the aisles of our shows. These are in neighborhood, in community, you know, and really it's what we did on the feature side. It's like reach down into the communities, more hand-to-hand combat.
Well, I'm a little surprised about that. I just always assumed I had contemplated, you know, opening up an SVOD service for years, but never did so. But I always assumed to have an SVOD service, you needed an Amazon, Prime add-on channels or a Roku, add-on channels. You've been able to do that without that?
No, we're as Pantaya would say, we're ubiquitous. We're on Roku channels, we're on Amazon Prime channels, we're on Apple Plus, but unlike most of the services out there in our neighborhood, people like, I think, the AMC channels, even like Stars or Showtime, some of these, they are getting most of their subscribers through the third-party distribution platforms, right? So they're, over half through Prime channels. When Prime channels is huge, or through Roku channels. For us, it's an inverted triangle. Over 70% of our consumers, of our subscribers, are direct. So they've come into the app store to buy it.
On the one hand, that's amazing, but on the other hand, it's a much more targeted audience. So I can see why the Facebook, the Google, the neighborhood grassroots.
Right. You can target them really well. In fact, at the very beginning, Roku wanted us to advertise on Roku. Problem was Roku couldn't. If Roku could allow me to buy ads to people who are watching Spanish language on Roku, and maybe they can now. I mean, my marketing team, I'm sure, looks at those things. At the time was, no, it goes across the whole platform. And Amazon was a bad place to market as well. But the real benefit of having 70% is the data. I've got 4 years of really rich data that everybody who's going through these third-party platforms doesn't have. And so in terms of programming, in terms of looking at, now I got the data, so we talk about the tech doesn't really matter. Well, the tech doesn't matter as much maybe for the consumer. It's, does it work and you find something? But for a company, if your tech stack isn't great and you're getting this data, but you're not able to analyze it well or chew through it. I mean, we're 25, 30 people running a film company and a streaming service. We're hiring people to do that because we have so much data. We have 5 million email addresses of people who have downloaded and registered. And so it's, there's a lot we can do with what we have because we have 70% we own 70% of our customers.
Yeah, that's really fascinating, Paul. Yeah.
All right, guys, I'm sure we could talk about this for hours and hours, but I think we have to wrap it up. Again, thank you to Danny, Jen, Paul, and Pato for being here. Special thank you to Pantaya for being our sponsor for this panel. And even more so, thank you to the audiences for tuning in, because it's all about you. So now enjoy the rest of the grill and all the great conversations that we're having.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, Tim, and thank you, Pato, Jen, and Paul. It's been a real pleasure.
Wow. Thank you so much.